Hunger does more than tighten the stomach. It rearranges a person's thoughts, peeling back layers of fear until only raw instinct and fragile hope remain. And on this particular morning, as the sun crept over the dry African landscape, Destiny stood quietly at Amara's doorstep, waiting for her next breath to decide which way her life would turn. The drought had settled over the village like a long-held breath, refusing to release its grip. Cracked earth stretched in every direction, splitting open as though the land itself could no longer bear the weight of waiting. Trees that once swayed with green life now stood stiff and skeletal, their leaves scattered like forgotten promises across the ground. The riverbed had shrunk into a thin brown line, a ghost of the water that used to sing through it. Everywhere Amara looked, she saw reminders of scarcity, empty baskets, hollow eyes, and the quiet desperation of people doing everything they could to survive. She felt it inside her too, a tightness that never left, a reminder of days without enough food to soften the ache. In her small mud home, her siblings lay curled together on a single woven mat, their breaths uneven, their limbs thin from weeks of reduced meals. The youngest whimpered in his sleep, the kind of soft cry that came not from pain, but from the lingering memory of hunger. Amara stood in the doorway, holding a small bowl of rice wrapped in cloth. It was the last meal they had. She had measured each grain with trembling fingers, knowing it would never be enough. She should have woken them. She should have divided it between them. She should have been a sister stronger than her fear. But she hesitated, not out of selfishness, but because hunger made every decision feel too heavy for the heart. The morning breeze carried dust across her feet as she stepped outside. She stared down at the rice, thinking of the days ahead, trying to convince herself that there would somehow be more. She had been repeating that lie for weeks now. Each time she said it, the truth cracked a little more. She inhaled deeply, hoping the breath would fill the emptiness inside her. It didn't. She turned to go back inside when she heard the faint sound of footsteps dragging along the dirt road. The sound grew uneven, as though each step carried more struggle than strength. Amara narrowed her eyes and saw a man stumbling toward the shade of a wilted acacia tree. His clothes were torn and gray with dust. His face sagged with exhaustion, and his lips trembled with the dryness of someone who had been walking far longer than any human should. She watched him collapse beside the road, his body giving up before his spirit had the chance to speak. Amara froze. Strangers rarely passed through their remote village, and when they did, people were taught not to approach them without caution. The world was harsh even in good seasons. In times of drought, it became unforgiving. Yet something in the man's expression pulled her forward, an echo of her own desperation reflected in the emptiness of his eyes. He did not call for help. He didn't even raise his head. He simply lay there, chest rising unevenly, the dust settling around him, as if the earth already mourned him. She walked toward him slowly, each step guided by something deeper than logic. When she reached him, she knelt and placed the bowl of rice in his shaking hands. The man stared at the food as though seeing a miracle unfold. His eyes lifted to hers, filled with gratitude so pure it stung her chest. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked into silence. So, he ate instead, slowly, reverently, taking each bite with the care of someone who understood exactly what it cost her to give it. When he finished, he met her gaze again, his throat working around words he couldn't form. Finally, with a voice barely stronger than a whisper, he promised he would never forget what she had done. Amara managed a small nod, believing it was nothing more than a desperate man's attempt to express thanks. She turned to go home, her stomach empty, her body weak, her heart uncertain. Yet as she walked away, something unseen shifted in the morning air, a quiet stirring of destiny following her steps, preparing to return this act of compassion in a way she could never imagine. There are places where compassion fades quickly, swallowed by the daily struggle to survive, and where people remember mistakes more vividly than mercy. Yet even in such unforgiving landscapes, destiny keeps its quiet notes, recording every act of courage and every sacrifice made in the silence of need. Amara returned home after helping the stranger, moving through the dusty path with slow, deliberate steps, clutching the empty cloth that once held her family's last meal. She paused at the doorway, listening to the faint breaths of her siblings sleeping inside, their ribcages rising and falling with fragile rhythm. She tucked the cloth deep into her wrapper, hoping the hollow look in her hands would go unnoticed. The quietness of the house pressed against her heart, not with peace, but with the reminder of her decision, a choice made from compassion, but shadowed by consequences she could not yet name. She stepped inside gently, sitting beside her siblings and watching their restless sleep, feeling the ache inside her deepen with each small sound of discomfort they made. In the days that followed, hunger spread through their home like a slow-moving shadow, extending its reach into every corner. The morning meals became memories, and the evenings carried a heaviness that settled across their small room, like a second roof. Amara tried to distract her siblings with stories and laughter, but even her voice grew faint as the emptiness inside her grew stronger. Their mother watched in quiet concern, torn between her worry and the pride she held for her eldest daughter. She knew what Amara had done, though the girl had spoken no words of it. A mother always knows. Yet she said nothing, understanding that kindness often came with a cost greater than the world was willing to admit. Outside, the village whispered. The same people who had once borrowed salt or asked Amara to help fetch water now shook their heads when she walked by. They muttered that she had been foolish, that no wise girl would give away her family's last food to a man she barely knew. Some said compassion was a luxury their hunger-stricken village could not afford. Others said that the world rewarded only those who looked after themselves first. And though they voiced these judgments loudly, none of them had been there to witness the desperation in the stranger's eyes, or the quiet trembling of his hands as he accepted her offering. None of them had felt the pull in her heart that had guided her actions. Still, their words settled like dust on her spirit, leaving a dull ache she pushed aside each morning as she rose to face another day. Amara sought small jobs wherever she could find them. She carried buckets from the shrinking well for older neighbors, scrubbed cooking pots for families who had barely enough to fill them, and gathered firewood from the sparse forest where trees stood thin and brittle. The payments were often no more than a handful of groundnuts or a few coins barely worth counting. Yet she accepted each offering with grace, thankful for anything that could stretch their survival a little longer. Some people gave with hesitation, avoiding her eyes, as though her kindness toward the stranger had made her someone they could not fully trust. Others offered work simply because they believed she needed it. But no one voiced sympathy, and no one asked how her family was faring. In a place where everyone suffered, empathy became a rare luxury. Nights grew heavier with each passing day. The children lay awake longer, whispering their discomfort in small whimpers they tried to hide. Amara pressed cool cloths on their foreheads, hummed old lullabies, and held her youngest brother until his trembling eased. The darkness outside the window seemed to watch her, waiting for the moment when her strength would wane. She felt the pressure building inside her like a storm she could not outrun. She had always believed that kindness returned in some quiet form, that generosity never truly vanished into the world. Yet the longer the hunger stretched, the harder it became to hold on to that belief without question. Still, she continued to help where she could. She gave portions of her meager earnings to a widow who had even less, shared water with children who came to the well with cracked cups, and offered comfort to neighbors who felt overwhelmed by the unending struggle. It was not grand charity, but it was all she had, and it came from a place of sincerity that hardship could not dim. She clung to the quiet truth that compassion, no matter how small, carried weight unseen by those who measured life only by survival. But life in the village tightened around her like a closing fist. The riverbed dried further, crops wilted before reaching maturity, and the price of grain rose beyond anything her family could dream of affording. Even her mother's silence grew heavier, shaped by worry, too deep for words. Amara felt the fragile thread holding their world together begin to fray, and doubt crept into her heart for the first time since she had offered her last meal to the stranger. And just when she believed she had endured the worst this season could bring, a hardship far heavier than hunger prepared to fall upon her family, one that would shake the foundation of everything she thought she understood about sacrifice, kindness, and destiny. Storms rarely announce their purpose, yet they arrive with an authority that bends even the strongest spirits. And when the sky finally broke open over Amara's village, the thunder carried more than rain. It carried a warning that her fate was about to shift in ways she could not yet imagine. The first raindrops fell with a softness that almost felt like mercy, darkening the cracked earth as if attempting to soothe months of relentless drought. But the clouds that gathered above the village were heavy, swollen with untamed force, and the wind whispering through the brittle trees carried a note of uncertainty. Within minutes, the drizzle transformed into a downpour so fierce that even the oldest villagers paused in awe, whispering prayers for protection. The dusty paths dissolved into streams, the dry riverbed roared back to life in a muddy rush, and the roofs of fragile huts trembled beneath the assault. Amara watched from the doorway of her home as the ground surged with water, realizing that what the village had begged for, rain, had arrived in a form powerful enough to break what little stability they still had. Their small hut, patched with layers of mud and worn thatch, could not endure the storm's anger. Water seeped through the roof in narrow streams, dripping onto their only bedding until the fabric clung to her sibling's skin like cold glue. Amara rushed to gather bowls, pots, and cracked gourds, placing them beneath the leaks in a desperate attempt to protect the little comfort they had left. The children shivered, pulling themselves into tight bundles as the cold wind pushed through the gaps in the walls. She wrapped them in the thinnest cloths she owned, her hands moving with a steadiness that contradicted the fear rising inside her. Each flash of lightning illuminated the contours of her mother's worried face, revealing the exhaustion that hardship had etched deep into her features. When the storm stretched into the following day, hunger, which had once been an ache, sharpened into something more dangerous. With the crops flooded and the firewood soaked, even basic meals became impossible to prepare. Amara ventured out into the rain's aftermath, searching for dry wood among the broken branches scattered across the village paths. The ground swallowed her feet with each step, the mud clinging to her legs as though determined to weigh her down. She collected wood piece by piece, her fingers numb, her clothes drenched, yet she refused to return home empty-handed. The storm had taken enough already. She would not let it strip away her resolve. Inside their hut, her youngest sibling grew weaker. Fever clung to the child's fragile frame, turning his breaths into shallow, rapid gasps. Amara held him close, rocking him gently while murmuring soft words meant to shield him from fear. The warmth of her skin was a small comfort against the chill that had crept into his bones. Her mother knelt beside them, wringing out wet cloths and placing them on his forehead. But her trembling hands revealed the truth she refused to speak aloud. They needed help, real help, and the village had grown too weary to spare compassion. Amara gathered the strength she had left and stepped into the community to seek aid. She approached houses she had once visited freely, calling softly through cracked doors and leaning into the dim spaces where lanterns flickered against damp walls. Some villagers apologized, but their eyes avoided hers, weighed down by fear of scarcity. Others offered vague excuses, insisting they had nothing to spare, or that their own children were too vulnerable. A few simply closed their doors without speaking, unwilling to share even a small portion of their remaining supplies. Amara understood their fear, yet each refusal struck her like a quiet blow. Compassion had drained from the village as surely as the river had drained during the drought, leaving behind a brittle hardness she had not expected to witness so clearly. That evening, her mother sat beside her and spoke with a softness that carried both love and sorrow. She told Amara that life would test them beyond what felt reasonable, that hard days were gathering like clouds refusing to pass, and that strength was not measured by how easily one survived, but by how deeply one endured without losing the ability to hope. Amara listened, trying to absorb the comfort hidden beneath the warning, but doubt tugged at her heart like an invisible hand. She wondered if her choice to feed the stranger had doomed them, if compassion had betrayed her, if kindness in a world of scarcity was nothing more than a luxury reserved for those who could afford it. As night settled over the village, the storm faded into a cold, eerie quiet. The hut still leaked, the fever still burned, the hunger still gnawed. And for the first time, Amara felt a crack form inside her belief that goodness always returned to its giver. Yet just as despair threatened to claim her, a familiar voice rose from the village pathway, a voice carrying not just recognition, but the weight of a secret she had never imagined would find its way back to her. Some returns slip quietly into life, wrapped in ordinary moments, but others arrive like a breath of wind that carries the scent of a new beginning, stirring the very soul. And when the polished vehicle rolled toward Amara's village that morning, it felt less like a visitor, and more like a miracle walking toward the fading edges of her hope. The village had barely recovered from the storm when the distant hum of an engine drifted across the quiet fields. It was a sound so unfamiliar that people paused mid-task, their eyes narrowing toward the dirt road where dust lifted in scattered clouds. Vehicles rarely visited their remote community, and polished ones were rarer still. Soon, a crowd began forming near the entrance of the village. Women with baskets paused in disbelief. Children clung to their mothers' wrappers. Elders straightened their backs. And even the men who once mocked Amara stepped forward with curiosity, tugging at their expressions. The vehicle rolled to a slow stop, its surface reflecting the morning light in a way that made it seem almost out of place against the worn huts and cracked ground. When the door opened, the murmurs swelled. A man stepped out, tall, steady, dressed in clean attire that held the quiet dignity of someone who had known both hardship and recovery. His face, though familiar, carried new strength, as though life had reshaped him since the day he collapsed beside the village road. The dust that once clung to him like a second skin was gone. His shoulders no longer sagged. His eyes held clarity, gratitude, and purpose. Even before he spoke, it was clear that he had not returned by accident. He asked for a girl, the girl who had shared her last meal with him, the one who had offered kindness without expecting anything in return. His words traveled through the crowd, stirring whispers that fluttered from one villager to the next. Some blinked in disbelief. Others exchanged uneasy glances, remembering the harsh words they had spoken about Amara's generosity. Children tugged at their parents' hands, eager to listen. A few women murmured prayers beneath their breath, sensing something extraordinary in the way the man spoke her name, as though it held weight he had carried across miles. The crowd, uncertain yet intrigued, pointed him toward Amara's hut. He walked with a determined stride, his steps steady on the uneven path, guided not by pride, but by an unwavering resolve to find the one person he could not forget. As he approached the fragile home patched from storm damage, he paused, inhaling deeply before lifting his hand to knock. Inside, Amara knelt beside her youngest sibling, pressing another cool cloth to the child's forehead. She had not slept well. Worry had carved fresh lines along her expression. When she heard the knock, she expected a neighbor or a request for help. Instead, when she opened the door, her breath caught. For a moment, time hesitated. She stared at the stranger, yet he was not entirely a stranger. Beneath the polished appearance, beneath the renewed strength, she, recognized the man who had once lain helpless by the side of the road, the man she had fed, while ignoring the ache in her own stomach. The transformation unsettled her, not in fear, but in awe. She struggled to connect the image before her with the memory she carried. He bowed his head slightly, emotion softening his features. He told her he had searched for her ever since the day he regained strength and reached the city. He explained that her kindness had stayed with him, echoing through every mile he traveled and every challenge he faced. He spoke of how her simple act had awakened something inside him: courage, faith, gratitude, a belief that humanity still held pockets of light, even in places overshadowed by hardship. He did not speak for praise, he spoke because the truth pressed against his heart with urgency. Amara listened, feeling a mixture of confusion, humility, and warmth she could not fully name. She had not expected gratitude. She certainly had not expected his return. She had believed her act of kindness had dissolved into the world like a dropped grain of rice lost to the earth. Yet here he stood, carrying the weight of her single gesture, as though it had been the turning point of his life. The villagers gathered close to her hut, their faces lined with disbelief and growing curiosity. Some shifted uneasily, remembering how quickly they had dismissed her compassion. Others watched with silent awe, sensing that something more profound than gratitude filled the air. The man reached into the vehicle and retrieved a sealed envelope and a small wrapped bundle. His gaze rested on Amara with a tenderness shaped by memory, respect, and a promise kept across distance and time. He told her he had returned because he owed her far more than words. He owed her the future she had unknowingly helped him reclaim. And as he placed the bundle into her trembling hands, Amara sensed that what he carried was not merely a gift, but a life-altering truth, one powerful enough to shift her family's destiny forever. Opportunity rarely enters life with the certainty of sunlight. More often, it arrives like a fragile spark flickering in the dark, beautiful, terrifying, and easy to ignore. And when Cheek extended his offer to Amara, that spark glowed faintly between them, asking her to trust a future she could barely imagine. For a long moment after Cheek's wrapped bundle, Amara stood and fingers trembled as she told her that he ran a small but steadily growing business focused on community distribution, one built from resilience rather than luck. Amara listened quietly, her heart pulling in unfamiliar directions. When he extended the offer, a job in the city, housing, training, and a chance to rebuild her life, Amara's breath caught. He spoke with clarity, assuring her it was not charity. He had seen something in her the day she shared her last meal with him, something rare and powerful, selflessness without expectation. In her eyes he had witnessed a quiet intelligence, the subtle strength of someone who endured hardship without letting it harden her spirit. That kind of heart, he said, could shape destinies. Her mother stepped closer, listening closely while holding the youngest sibling who lay weak from fever. The idea of sending her eldest daughter to the city felt like stepping into darkness, without a lantern. Fear flickered in her gaze, fear of distance, fear of danger, fear of losing the only anchor that kept their fragile world from sinking. Yet beneath the fear, a softer truth stirred. Maybe this was the path that destiny had been preparing long before they understood it. Her mother studied Cheek with silent scrutiny, watching the sincerity in his posture and the respect with which he spoke to Amara, and something in her own heart eased just slightly. Neighbors gathered outside, their curiosity swelling as Cheeky explained his intentions openly, refusing secrecy. Some villagers murmured in disbelief, questioning why a city businessman would choose a poor village girl for such an opportunity. Others remained silent, remembering the storm, the hunger, the hardship that had nearly crushed Amara's resilience. Yet even they could not suppress the faint wonder that spread through the crowd, wonder at the idea that kindness, whispered quietly into the world, had somehow found its way back. That night, Amara barely slept. She lay awake beside her siblings, listening to the steady drip of water still falling from the patched roof. The storm had passed, but the uncertainty remained, humming through her chest like a restless bird. The offer felt too large to grasp. She imagined the vastness of the city, the towering buildings, the unfamiliar roads, and the fast voices that filled crowded markets. She imagined failing. She imagined succeeding. She imagined both with equal fear. But then she remembered the look in her youngest brother's eyes, the fevered haze, the hunger carving thin lines across his cheeks. She remembered the storms that had taken their crops and the refusals she had received when she sought help. Survival in the village was becoming a quiet war against scarcity, and kindness alone could not shield her family from the crushing weight of need. Amara rose before dawn, stepping outside to breathe the cool air before the sun stretched across the village. She walked the familiar paths, touching the rough bark of the old tree near their hut, pausing beside the empty granary where corn once lay, and kneeling briefly near the fire pit where her mother had cooked countless meals now replaced by silence. She felt the memories cling to her, but she also felt the faint stir of courage growing beneath them. She understood that staying meant surviving one day at a time. Leaving meant stepping toward a life she did not know, but might someday shape. By the time the sun lifted, casting soft light across the village, her decision had formed. Not without fear, but with clarity. When Cheek returned in the morning, she stood outside her hut with a small cloth bag containing her few belongings. Her mother placed trembling hands on her shoulders, whispering a blessing shaped from years of struggle and hope. Her siblings clung to her legs, their faces pressed against her dress, unaware of the enormity of the moment, but sensing the shift in the air. Chika opened the vehicle door gently, his voice steady as he assured her one last time that she would not face this new path alone. And with her heart pounding and her hands shaking, Amara stepped forward. As the vehicle carried her beyond the borders of the only life she had ever known, she felt the world expand in ways that frightened and excited her, without realizing that the journey ahead would transform not only her future, but Cheek's as well. Some journeys widen a person long before they widen the road ahead. Sometimes the world grows not when the feet move, but when the heart dares to step into places it once believed were unreachable. And as Amara entered the city for the first time, her fear and wonder intertwined like two threads weaving the beginning of a destiny she had never imagined. The city greeted her like a wave that refused to slow down. Streets stretched into endless paths, buzzing with noise, energy, and color. Tall buildings rose like giants carved from glass and steel, shimmering beneath the sunlight in a way that made her blink repeatedly. Everywhere she turned, something new pulled at her attention. Cars weaving between lanes, buses brimming with passengers, vendors calling out prices in hurried tones, and pedestrians moving with a purpose Amara had never seen before. She pressed her palms together to steady herself, feeling both the thrill and terror of standing in a world that moved faster than breath. Cheek walked a few steps ahead, but always glanced back, his smile calm and encouraging, reminding her quietly that her place here was not a mistake. He guided her through narrow streets lined with workshops, shops, and bustling activity. He explained that his small but growing business focused on creating solar devices for communities living in darkness, simple inverters, portable lanterns, and low-cost energy units designed to reach villages forgotten by electricity. His voice carried pride, not in a boastful way, but with the sincerity of someone who had built something from struggle rather than luxury. Amara listened carefully, absorbing every word with the eagerness of someone who understood the value of light, because she had lived so long without it. She saw how people greeted Cheek warmly in the marketplace, calling him by name, expressing gratitude, asking questions, seeking guidance. It revealed a part of him she hadn't seen, the leader shaped by responsibility, compassion, and vision. When they arrived at his workshop, she paused at the doorway, feeling the heartbeat of activity inside. Tables were covered with wires, soldering tools, metal frames, and small glowing prototypes. The air smelled of warm metal and fresh paint, carrying the energy of creation. His team, a small group of young men and women, glanced up from their work as Chica introduced her. Their curiosity was natural. Her village clothes, quiet demeanor, and nervous posture marked her as someone who had never stepped into a space like this. But their curiosity held no malice. They welcomed her with gentle nods and polite smiles, sensing the sincerity in the way she whispered greetings and bowed her head slightly out of respect. Her tasks at first were simple: sweeping the workspace, organizing screws and wires into labeled jars, cleaning dust from solar panels, arranging shipments, and observing from a respectful distance. Amara accepted each responsibility with the same humility that guided her in the village. She asked questions softly but eagerly, watching the technicians' movements with careful attention. She studied the way wires connected, how circuits responded to pressure, how sunlight became energy, and how each device carried a pulse like a small living heartbeat. Her mind absorbed the process, not with haste, but with hunger, the kind of hunger shaped by years of survival and the understanding that knowledge, once gained, could never be taken away. Days turned into weeks, and her progress became impossible to overlook. She learned to strip wires neatly, to test circuits without hesitation, to assemble basic lantern units with precision, and to troubleshoot minor faults with surprising instincts. Her hands grew steadier, her confidence stronger, and her presence more assured. Sometimes she caught Chaik watching her from across the room, his expression softening into admiration. He understood that she was not simply learning, she was transforming. Her journey had stretched her beyond fear, beyond scarcity, beyond the limitations she once believed defined her. She carried a quiet discipline that inspired the team, who soon found themselves asking for her assistance without realizing how naturally she had become a part of their rhythm. Amara's days filled with purpose, and for the first time in her life, she felt her future expanding rather than shrinking. She no longer measured time by hunger or storms. Instead, she marked each day by what she had learned, how her skill shaped light, how her effort brought energy to homes once trapped in darkness, and how her presence in the workshop became a small but meaningful thread in a larger vision. Even the city's overwhelming pace no longer frightened her. It challenged her, guided her, and awakened her. Yet growth rarely arrives without its shadows. And one quiet afternoon, as the team prepared a shipment for a remote village, Amara stood at the workstation soldering wires for a batch of newly designed solar units. She worked with confidence, steady, focused, assured. But in that moment, a small miscalculation slipped into her process, a detail so subtle she did not notice it at first. And while the mistake was small, its consequences waited quietly, ready to strike. When the device in her hand sparked unexpectedly, a jolt of fear rushed through her, signaling that everything she had worked for was about to be tested in a way she never saw coming. Growth does not arrive through perfection. It arrives through the weight of missteps that force the heart to stretch wider than fear. And the day Amara miswired the solar unit, she felt the echoes of every doubt she had outrun, returning to test the strength she thought she had finally found. The workshop buzzed with its usual rhythm, machines humming, metal clicking beneath skilled hands, the soft scratch of tools against panels. Yet Amara felt sharper awareness in the air that morning. Chica had entrusted her with assembling a key batch of solar units scheduled for delivery to a community where children had been studying by candlelight for years. It was the first time she was allowed to participate in this stage of production, and her heart carried both pride and trembling anticipation. Her hands moved with the slow steadiness she had been practicing for weeks, tracing each wire with the same care she once used when comforting her siblings. She measured, connected, pressed, and adjusted, whispering silent encouragement to herself as though the device could sense her intentions. But even steady hands can falter under the weight of expectation. As she worked through the final connections, A small hesitation slipped between her thoughts. A moment brief enough to seem harmless, yet long enough for one wrong wire to fall into the wrong place. She did not notice. Her breath had been too shallow, her mind too eager to complete the task successfully. When she completed the unit and placed it among the others, she felt a fragile sense of accomplishment settling around her like early morning light. For a fleeting moment, she believed she was finally becoming someone worthy of this new world. Then testing began. One by one, the completed units were connected to the panel for inspection. The first hummed to life perfectly, the second glowed steadily. But when the technician powered the third, Amara's unit, the device sputtered, flickered weakly, and released a faint popping sound before falling silent. The workshop, normally filled with conversation, fell into a sharp, pointed quiet. Several workers turned toward her, their expressions shifting from confusion to irritation. The air tightened as though disappointment had seeped into its corners, ghost-like and cold. A few team members exchanged glances before offering criticisms that cut deeper than they understood. They spoke of inexperience, of wasted materials, of how shortcuts in training created unnecessary risks. Their voices were not cruel, but neither were they gentle. The words reminded Amara too much of the village whispers that had once chased her through dusty paths, voices calling her foolish, naive, unfit. She felt the weight of those memories settle inside her, heavy as stones pressing against her ribs. The workshop blurred as she blinked rapidly, fighting the old instinct to shrink into silence. Before she could retreat further into her doubt, Chaik stepped forward. He did not raise his voice, nor did he dismiss the concerns of the team. Instead, he picked up the malfunctioning device with a quiet deliberateness that softened the tension in the room. He placed it gently on the work table and invited Amara to stand beside him. She hesitated, the pull of embarrassment urging her to step back, yet something in his calm expression reminded her of the day he arrived at her village, a day she had offered help, despite her own hunger. That memory steadied her enough to move closer. Chaik pointed out the mistake with patience, tracing the line of the miswired connection without judgment. He explained how such errors were common, not only among beginners, but even among experienced technicians. He told her about the first solar unit he ever built, and how it had failed spectacularly in front of a potential investor. He spoke of the embarrassment he carried that day, and how the lesson it taught him became the foundation on which he built his business. His voice held neither pity nor disappointment. It held respect for her effort, for her courage, for the possibility he still saw in her. Amara felt tears rise, not from shame, but from relief. His words reached into the part of her that had spent years believing that mistakes defined destiny. Instead, he showed her a truth she had never been taught. Failure was not the end of the road, but the beginning of mastery. He reminded her gently that she had come too far to surrender to one mistake, and that strength was not the absence of error, but the willingness to learn from it without losing heart. She inhaled deeply, feeling something inside her reshape itself. With quiet determination, she reassembled the unit, this time with clearer focus and steadier confidence. The team watched, not with judgment now, but with newfound respect, as she corrected her work and presented it for testing again. When the device glowed with stable light, a ripple of acknowledgement passed through the room, subtle, yet undeniable. Amara felt a spark ignite within her, small but powerful, a spark of belief she had earned with her resilience. And though she did not yet know, the strength she discovered in that moment would soon lead her to a breakthrough so unexpected that even Chaik, with all his confidence in her, would be left astonished. Hidden potential rarely announces itself loudly. It waits in silence, buried beneath fear, hardship, and forgotten dreams, until courage finally touches it, awakening a brilliance even the world did not expect to see. And as Amara pushed herself beyond exhaustion in those late evenings, something extraordinary within her began to rise. The weeks after her first failure transformed Amara in ways she could not fully understand. She found herself staying in the workshop long after the others had left, sitting beneath the dim glow of the overhead bulb, surrounded by silent tools and unfinished devices. The workshop at night felt different, calmer, almost sacred. Without the noise of daytime, she could hear the rhythm of her own thoughts more clearly, feel her curiosity stretching across the wires and circuits laid out before her. She traced power flow diagrams with her fingers, studied old manuals Chiki kept stored on a dusty shelf, and practiced connecting small components until her hands moved with instinct rather than hesitation. Each evening, she promised herself she would stop after one more try, yet every time she pushed the task aside, a new idea rose, urging her to return. She began experimenting with wiring arrangements, exploring how energy traveled through the lamps they produced. Something inside her sensed patterns others overlooked, subtle shifts, delicate flows, minor inefficiencies that sparked her imagination. One night, as raindrops tapped gently against the workshop window, she noticed a cluster of wires arranged in a way that felt unnecessarily strained. She wondered what would happen if she redirected them, creating a smoother path for current to travel. Her fingers moved slowly, adjusting the lines with careful deliberation. When she tested the lamp, she watched in awe as the light shone brighter than before, cleaner, steadier, and somehow more alive. And astonishingly, the unit used slightly less energy to achieve that brightness. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from pride, but from disbelief. She repeated the test, then again, wanting to be certain her discovery was real. Each time the lamp glowed with the same quiet brilliance, her breath caught, and she felt a warmth in her chest that no storm, hunger, or failure had ever been able to silence. The realization formed slowly, like dawn spreading across a dark horizon. She had not simply improved a device, she had created something new. When Cheek walked into the workshop early the next morning, he found her asleep at the table, her head resting beside the glowing lamp that still emitted its steady light. He touched her shoulder gently, waking her with concern. She sat up quickly, embarrassed, then explained what she had been working on. Her voice trembled with uncertainty, unsure if he would dismiss her attempt as coincidence or error. But Chike listened with the same attentiveness he offered his own mentors when he first began. When she finished, he examined the lamp closely, tracing her wiring pattern with slow, deliberate care. His silence stretched long enough to make her nervous, yet his expression softened into something she had rarely seen: pure astonishment. He asked her to reconstruct the design while the team gathered, watching her movements with growing interest. When the second lamp lit with the same improved efficiency, murmurs spread through the workshop. The team members who once questioned her capability now stared at her with newfound respect. Even those who prided themselves on technical expertise leaned forward, eager to understand the pattern she had created. Chike stepped back, arms crossed, his expression filled with admiration and gratitude. He told the team that what Amara had discovered was not luck. It was innovation. Word of her idea spread quickly among the workers. They requested her help with their own projects, asking her to explain her reasoning, to teach them how she saw what they missed. Though shy at first, she found herself growing into the role naturally. She guided others with the same gentleness she used when caring for her siblings, her instructions patient and clear. The team watched her rise with a mixture of pride and amazement, recognizing a talent that had been hidden beneath years of silence and survival. Chike, too, felt a deeper respect forming inside him. He saw not just the girl who once shared her last meal, but a mind capable of reshaping their business and expanding possibilities beyond anything he had imagined alone. He began involving her in more advanced work, seeking her perspective during design meetings, encouraging her to trust her instincts even when uncertainty clouded her voice. And with each passing week, the workshop changed. The air grew lighter, The workers collaborated more eagerly. Hope traveled through the space like quiet electricity, and Amara stood at the center of it, still humble, still learning, yet undeniably shining. But unseen beyond the doors of the workshop, someone else had begun paying attention too. Someone who had watched her rise from afar. Someone connected to the kindness she once offered without expectation. And as that hidden observer stepped closer into her widening world, Amara's life prepared to shift again, this time in ways far more powerful than she ever imagined. Gratitude is a quiet seed. It does not bloom immediately, nor does it seek attention. Instead, it grows in silence, nourished by memory, purpose, and unspoken promise, until one day it rises with a force strong enough to change another life forever. And as Amara stood before Cheek's closed office door, she sensed a shift in the air. Something vast, something intimate, something long in the making. Amara hesitated before knocking, her fingers trembling slightly as she listened to the muffled hum of machines outside the office and the faint echo of footsteps in the hallway. Cheek had sent for her with an expression she could not decipher, one that blended seriousness with something far gentler, though she could not name it yet. The moment she entered, she noticed the room felt unusually heavy, as though the weight of years had settled quietly between the stacks of documents and the tools arranged neatly on his desk. Cheek rose slowly, studying her with an intensity that made her heart flutter with uncertainty. She wondered if she had made another mistake in the workshop, or if he had finally decided she was unworthy of the responsibilities he had placed on her shoulders. But instead of reprimand, he gestured for her to sit, his voice warm, yet solemn. He spoke of time, how it had a way of circling back on itself, how certain moments from the past refused to fade, how some debts lived quietly in the heart until the right moment arrived to honor them. The words were soft, but they carried a depth Amara had rarely heard in anyone's voice. She listened with growing confusion as he spoke of promises made long before she ever stepped into the city, promises rooted in a day she had nearly forgotten, a day when she had chosen kindness over caution, despite her own hunger and hardship. Then Cheek opened a drawer and placed a thick envelope on the desk between them. The sight of it tightened something inside her, and she leaned forward slowly, afraid of what it meant. With deliberate calm, he encouraged her to look inside. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the papers, reading the first lines with widening eyes. It was a scholarship, fully funded, comprehensive, and prestigious, offering her the opportunity to study engineering at a renowned institution. The letters bore official seals, signatures, and words that felt too large for her to grasp. Admission, sponsorship, mentorship, future placement. The room seemed to spin as she tried to absorb the enormity of what she held in her hands. She looked up at Cheek, speechless. Her throat tightened with emotion she could not contain, and tears pooled in her eyes before she could blink them away. She tried to speak, to thank him, to tell him she didn't deserve something so life-altering, but the words dissolved on her tongue. Cheek's expression softened as he watched her struggle. He moved closer, resting his hand gently on the desk, close enough to reassure without overwhelming. He reminded her of the day she shared her last meal with a stranger who could barely stand, a day when she held nothing, yet gave everything she had. He told her that her kindness had not only filled his stomach, but had restored something broken inside him, something he had carried in silence for years. Her act had shifted his path, given him strength, reminded him of humanity at a time when he had nearly lost faith in it. And now, he said, it was his turn to honor that moment. Not with charity, but with an opportunity he believed she was destined for. Her mind, her discipline, her resilience, her quiet brilliance. These were gifts he had witnessed grow day by day. He wanted to give her the chance to shape a world far larger than the one she had known, to build innovations that could transform lives the way she had transformed his. He told her she did not earn the scholarship through pity. She earned it through potential. Amara lowered her gaze, overwhelmed, remembering the village, the storms, the hunger, the criticism, the nights of fear, the quiet prayer whispered over the last bowl of rice she had given away. And in that moment, she felt something inside her shift, an understanding that destiny had been circling her quietly, waiting for this moment of recognition. She asked him softly if he believed she could truly succeed in a world so vast and demanding. Cheeky smiled, a warm and certain smile, and replied that she had already succeeded in ways most people never would. She had chosen kindness in hardship, courage in fear, growth after failure. Engineering, he said, was simply the next step. She held the documents against her chest, trembling with gratitude so deep it shook her to her bones. But even as her future opened like a sunrise before her, Amara did not yet know that stepping into this new world would reveal challenges, triumphs, and truths far greater than anything she had ever imagined. And her greatest test was still waiting on the horizon. Education is not merely a path, it is a doorway through which entire destinies step, often quietly, without ceremony, yet with a force capable of reshaping a life from its very foundation. And when Amara crossed the threshold of her new engineering school, she felt as though the world had cracked open before her, revealing possibilities she once believed belonged only to the children of wealth, safety, and comfort. Amara entered her first semester with a fire in her spirit that had been forged in hunger, storms, and the quiet resilience of her village. She stepped into classrooms filled with polished floors, bright screens, and students who carried confidence like an inherited crown. At first, the environment felt intimidating, almost unreal, as though she had walked into someone else's dream. Yet each time doubt crept close, she reminded herself of the long nights she had spent fixing lamps under dim lantern light, the patience she had learned from Cheek's guidance, and the memory of her family's weary faces the day she left home. These were the truths that steadied her hands and sharpened her focus whenever fear tried to weaken her resolve. Her professors quickly noticed something different about her, not loud brilliance, but quiet mastery. When she solved complex wiring problems with steady calm, they watched her with expressions of curiosity and admiration. When she explained circuits with clarity far beyond her experience, they exchanged glances, sensing the emergence of a rare mind. Amara studied not for grades or praise, but for purpose, drawing from memories that still lived beneath her skin. The drought, the empty bowls, her youngest sibling's fever during the storm, and the stranger she had fed on a day when kindness came at the cost of her own hunger. These memories shaped every step she took, grounding her in a humility that made her discipline even more powerful. During her first long break, Amara joined an internship at a small tech company specializing in energy solutions for rural communities. The work felt like a bridge between her past and her future, the hum of soldering tools echoing her days under the mango tree, the sight of solar grids reminding her of how darkness once swallowed her village each night. She contributed ideas with hesitation at first, afraid of appearing foolish, but her supervisors encouraged her, recognizing the creativity that flowed naturally from her lived experiences. When she designed an improved solar charging module specifically tailored for low-income households, the team praised her insight, noting that her design balanced efficiency with affordability in ways they had struggled to achieve for years. Through all of this, Chike remained a quiet but steady presence in her life. He checked on her progress gently, never intruding, never guiding more than necessary, always allowing her to grow at her own pace. Some evenings they spoke briefly, about her classes, her challenges, her discoveries, and although the conversations were simple, a warmth lingered beneath them that neither fully acknowledged. He supported her from a respectful distance, offering her the space to become the woman she was destined to be, without shaping her path, more than fate intended. As the semesters passed, Amara's world expanded. She presented at small innovation fairs, collaborated with fellow students, built prototypes that impressed even the most seasoned engineers, and began mentoring younger classmates who struggled with the same fears she once carried. Her confidence grew slowly but steadily, blooming like a flower that had waited years for rain. She found joy in her work, not because it made her feel important, but because it reminded her of the girl she had been, the girl who once believed that a single bowl of rice was all she had to offer the world. But growth comes with choices, and choices come with consequences. As she neared the end of her program, Amara received two extraordinary opportunities. One from a global energy corporation offering her a position with a salary large enough to lift her entire family out of hardship, and another from an innovation lab that wanted to fund her idea for sustainable rural electrification, an idea inspired by the needs of villages like her own. Both paths glittered with promise. Both offered a life she had once thought unreachable, and both would reshape her future in profoundly different ways. Yet what weighed on her heart most heavily was not the decision itself, but the realization that any path she chose would alter her connection to Chica, the man who had believed in her before she believed in herself, who had given her a doorway into a world she could never have entered alone. And as she held both offers in her trembling hands, Amara sensed that the choice before her carried a power far greater than career or ambition. It carried the weight of a future that could change not only her life, but Chike's as well. There are promises born from gratitude, and then there are promises shaped by destiny, vows that wait quietly for the right moment to unfold, knowing that when they do, they can alter the course of lives. As the village gathered beneath the fading gold of evening light, something in the air felt tender, yet monumental, as though every soul present could sense that another turning point was approaching, one as powerful as the day Amara first offered her last meal. The celebration from the day's work had not yet faded. The villagers still moved with energy, laughter rolling through the air like waves against sun-warmed stone. Children chased each other between the newly delivered equipment, their joy reflecting the first spark of hope their community had felt in years. Women hummed familiar songs, their voices blending with the soft rustle of the wind brushing across dry earth. In the midst of this warmth, Chica stepped forward, raising his hand with a gentle authority that quieted the crowd without force. The villagers instinctively gathered, forming a wide circle around him and Amara, sensing that he carried words too significant to be spoken casually. Cheek's expression held a depth that made even the breeze pause as if to listen. His voice, when it emerged, carried both tenderness and gravity, shaped by the memory of the day his life had collided with Amara's in its most fragile moment. He began by recounting the story the village knew only in fragments, the tale of a stranger who arrived starving and lost, and of a young girl who, despite her hunger, placed her last meal into his trembling hands. But he spoke of it not as a debt or an act of pity. He spoke of it as the moment that saved him from a despair he had never admitted to anyone. That single bowl of rice, he revealed, had done more than feed him. It had restored his faith in humanity, giving him strength to continue a journey he had nearly abandoned. As he spoke, the villagers shifted with a mixture of guilt, admiration, and pride. Many remembered criticizing Amara for her decision that day, calling her foolish for giving away food they believed she needed more desperately than the stranger. But now, watching Chike stand with the confidence of a man whose life had flourished, they saw clearly how her compassion had rippled outward in ways none of them could have predicted. Then Chike turned to Amara, his eyes softening with an emotion she recognized, but had never fully understood, until now. He explained that throughout the years he had supported her education, guided her growth, and watched her rise, not because he felt obligated, but because he saw in her the courage and vision the world often overlooks. He had promised himself, long before she knew it, that when the time was right, he would give her not just an opportunity, but a foundation upon which she could build a legacy greater than anything she had imagined. He reached into a leather folder and pulled out several documents, holding them with a reverence that stirred the crowd's curiosity. The first was the deed to a new home, spacious, secure, and located close enough to the village for her to serve her community, while still enjoying the comfort and dignity she deserved. The second document outlined a business partnership, officially naming Amara as co-founder of their renewable energy initiative, a role that granted her equal authority, equal profit, and equal responsibility. The villagers murmured in awe. In their world, such opportunities were nearly unimaginable, especially for a woman who had once struggled merely to survive. And then came the final document, the leadership contract for a foundation dedicated to rural development, education, and sustainable progress, an institution he wanted her to guide, shape, and one day inherit completely. Chucky explained that her compassion had built the foundation long before it had a name, and it was only fitting that she should lead it. His words fell gently, yet powerfully, settling into her heart like a blessing she had never dared to pray for. Emotion overtook her with a force she could not restrain. Tears blurred her vision, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that kindness, when offered without expectation, returns with a magnitude the heart cannot measure. She thought of her siblings, her mother, the nights she slept hungry, the storm that nearly broke her, and the trembling uncertainty of stepping into Cheek's vehicle for the first time. Every struggle, every sacrifice had led here, to this moment where destiny no longer felt like something happening to her, but something she was shaping with her own hands. The villagers erupted in applause, celebrating not just Amara's success, but the living proof that small acts of goodness carry the power to transform entire worlds. Standing at her side, Cheek felt a quiet peace settle into his soul, knowing he had finally fulfilled the promise he had carried for 10 years. And yet, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the village basked in their newfound hope, Cheek knew there was still one truth he had not spoken, one that, once revealed, would open a new chapter neither of them was prepared for, a chapter destined to reshape their future in a way even kindness could not predict. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without becoming part of our growing storytelling family. Subscribe now, so you never miss the powerful journeys waiting ahead, stories built on destiny, resilience, and hope. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice keeps these stories alive and gives them meaning. And if today's tale moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still shapes miracles.